Come on, that can't possibly be a real aircraft carrier made out of sawdust. Well, during World War II, the United States, Britain, and Canada considered building the largest ship in history. It would be over 3 times longer than the USS Gerald R. Ford, and would have a top speed of 40 knots. But it was going to be made out of wood. Not just any wood, but a lightweight synthetic wood called pykrete. Pykrete is made by combining wood pulp with a chemical substance known as phenol and then superheating the mixture under high pressure. The result is a lightweight synthetic wood that is incredibly strong. In fact, it's so strong that the US military at the time described it as being able to withstand the full force of a kamikaze bomber. But how could they build such a large ship out of this material? And why did they consider doing something so crazy? To answer that, we need to go back to the beginning. In 1941, the German battleship Bismarck was sailing through the frigid waters of the North Atlantic when it was spotted by a British reconnaissance plane. The Germans immediately realized that they were being stalked and attempted to shake off their pursuers. They turned Bismarck towards the British and accelerated to 30 knots, but the British were hot on their tail. When Bismarck turned, the British followed, not stopping until Bismarck reached the coast of France, where it was sunk by the British and the German battleship became a distant memory. This near miss prompted the British Admiralty to develop a new class of escort carriers. These ships were to be fast, durable, and able to defend themselves against air attacks, but no one expected them to be made of wood. Enter Project Habakkuk. The name may sound familiar to those who have heard Billie Eilish's song about it, but it was much more than just a concept. It was a serious plan to build an aircraft carrier that could keep up with the rest of the fleet. The idea was proposed by Rear Admiral Sir James Somerville, who had commanded the British cruisers during the Battle of the River Plate, where his fleet was forced to retreat after coming under attack by the German battleship Scharnhorst and Neison. He had seen firsthand how vulnerable his fleet was to air attack and realized that they needed a way to defend themselves. The answer, he believed, lay in building an aircraft carrier that was lighter, faster, and more durable than any other carrier in the world. Somerville had been impressed by the performance of the Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi during the Battle of Pearl Harbor. The Akagi had been able to launch over 40 aircraft in a single wave, devastating the American fleet. But what impressed Somerville the most was the fact that the Akagi had been built using a new type of synthetic wood, known as plywood. Plywood is essentially layers of thin wood veneer glued together, with the grain oriented in alternating directions so that the finished product is stronger than solid wood. This process allowed for the creation of very large, strong, and lightweight panels, which were perfect for building ships. In fact, the Akagi was the first all-welded, all-plywood warship ever built. Not only did this make her stronger and lighter than any previous warship, but it also made her much faster. The Akagi was able to make 30 knots, while most battleships could only manage 20 knots. This speed was important because it meant that the Akagi could outrun enemy fire and also allow her planes to reach their targets before they were fired upon. When Somerville learned about the Akagi, he immediately began researching the possibility of building a similar aircraft carrier for the Royal Navy. He knew that Britain had a lot of wood available, thanks to its colonial empire, and he thought that they could use this wood to create an unbeatable aircraft carrier. So in July of 1941, he submitted a proposal to the Admiralty, suggesting the construction of a 600-meter-long plywood aircraft carrier. He named it the Hakodate after the Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had commanded the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Admiralty was intrigued and approved further research into the project. A small team was assembled consisting of naval architects, engineers, and of course, Rear Admiral Somerville. The team met in a small room at the Admiralty building in Whitehall, London, and began their work. They had a lot of questions that needed to be answered. How strong was this new material? Could it really withstand the rigors of combat? And how would they build such a large ship without the necessary resources? To answer these questions, they began conducting a series of experiments. They built small models of the ship and tested them in the towing tank at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich. They wanted to see how the ship would behave in different sea states and at different speeds. They also wanted to know how much resistance the ship would encounter when moving through the water. The tests were successful and the model ship performed better than anyone had expected. It was stable, maneuverable, and efficient. The team was excited and began making plans for a full-scale prototype. They drew up blueprints for a massive aircraft carrier that was 600 meters long and 82 feet wide. It would be powered by 2 screws, and would have a top speed of 40 knots. The ship would be equipped with catapults and elevators to launch and recover aircraft. and it would have a crew of 1,600 men. The ship would be built in two sections, one in Liverpool and the other in Belfast. Then the two sections would be towed to the Clyde River, where they would be joined together. The ship would then be launched and would begin sea trials. The Admiralty was impressed with the design and approved the construction of the prototype. The work began immediately, and the people of Liverpool and Belfast began preparing the ship's components. But before they could finish, the project was cancelled. The reason the materials needed to build the ship simply weren't available. The British Empire produced a lot of wood, but not enough to build a ship of this size. Despite this setback, Rear Admiral Somerville was not ready to give up. He believed that the ship was not only possible, but necessary. So he took his plans to the United States. When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, they had a lot of resources that the British did not. Not only did they have more wood, but they also had more advanced technology and a larger workforce. The US Navy was skeptical at first, but after hearing the arguments presented by Rear Admiral Somerville, they agreed to fund further research into the project. The US Navy set up a laboratory in New Orleans to test the strength and durability of the synthetic wood. They also began searching for ways to improve the design of the aircraft carrier. After months of research and development, the US Navy was convinced that the aircraft carrier was not only possible, but practical. They agreed to build a prototype and work began immediately. A massive shipyard was set up in New Orleans and the work began. The synthetic wood was delivered and the massive pieces of the aircraft carrier were assembled. But the work was slow, and the Navy soon realized that they would not be able to complete the project in time for the D-Day landings. With the war in Europe coming to an end, the project was once again abandoned. The US Navy decided to use the resources that they had already spent on the project to build a conventional aircraft carrier instead. This aircraft carrier would go on to become the USS Shangri-La, which played a key role in the Pacific War. Despite this success, the Habakkuk project was never revisited. The materials and technology needed to build such a massive synthetic wood ship were not available until decades later. However, the legacy of the project lives on today. The Canadian National Railway built a small number of wooden locomotives during the war, which are still in use today. And the US Navy still uses synthetic wood composites in the construction of their ships. Now, you might be wondering, what happened to the prototype? Well, the prototype was never finished, but there are a few pieces that remain today. One of the main components of the aircraft carrier was a massive rudder made out of synthetic wood. This rudder is now on display at the Mariners Museum in Park Ridge, New Jersey. There is also a small piece of the keel that is on display at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. So could this really have been the biggest aircraft carrier in history? Yes, absolutely. The synthetic wood used in its construction was incredibly strong and durable, and the design of the ship was sound. The reason it was never built was due to the lack of resources, and not because it was a bad idea. Today, we live in a world where anything is possible. If someone had told us 10 years ago that we would be launching rockets to Mars and building self-driving cars, we would have laughed, but today it's a reality. So who knows what the future holds? Maybe one day we will see a massive wooden aircraft carrier sailing through the seas. It might sound crazy today, but who knows what the future holds?